You were being asked by name. You are no longer an NPC. You are now a main character. What do we have? Oh yeah! We've got Romans 14:8. This came across my feed for the simple reason, and I don't know why it came across my feed, right? It's been like almost more than 10 years since I saw HBO's Rome. And one of the, and there was, they always throw these words or Roman terms around, like, the Evocati, the Triare, and the other stuff like that. Which, I know what, I didn't bother to understand because during that time the internet wasn't a thing yet. It existed, but it wasn't a thing yet, and we were at the mercy of cable networks. So now this came across this feed, and one of the most prominent words that they kept repeating in a particular HBO series was the Evocati. And I guess tonight we have an opportunity to actually learn what the Evocati means, because apparently, according to this video, it's the Roman Empire's most lethal secret unit. But before we check it out, please like, share, subscribe, do the whole notification button thing to help me out with the algo. And of course, don't forget, to check us out every weekend too, so you can watch me do this live. Alright? Here we go. Let's see what the Evocati is all about. Are we good?
Picture this. You're 50 years old. You're
AI.
sprinting full speed into a wall of 2,000 enemy shields.
Was that smart? No.
You aren't a terrified conscript. You're smiling.
Oh.
A split second later, a gladius enters your mouth and punches through the back of your neck. You are dead before you hit the ground. This was Gaius Christinus. He wasn't forced to be here. He had wealth, a farm, and a pension. He chose this death. Why?
Because why not? It was a warrior's death.
Because he was a member of the Evocati, the most lethal voluntary brotherhood in the history of the Roman Empire. Before we dissect the psychology of these ancient special forces, if you want to uncover more forgotten history, hit that like button and subscribe.
Help us out!
And please comment below, where are you watching from? I want to see how far this legion of history lovers extends across the globe. Now, back to the body on the ground. The death of Christinus at the Battle of Pharsalus in 48 BC wasn't a tragedy, it was a transaction. Minutes before the charge, Christinus, a retired Primus Pilus, the highest rank a centurion could achieve, walked up to Julius Caesar. He didn't salute, he made a guarantee. "General," he said.
He didn't salute, he made a guarantee. It's like Napoleon's Royal Guard. Among all of the units in the Napoleonic army, they were like the only ones who could actually approach Napoleon and bitch and complain about, the state of things. So we are definitely looking at an old man in a young man's game. So just like your edgy or neckbeard uncle posts in Facebook, like, throw me among the wolves and I shall come back leading the pack. Or, beware of an old man in a young man, where young man dies, or, other stuff like that. I'm guessing that's him. An old man in a young men are in an industry or in a game where young men are supposed to die.
"I shall manage it so that you will thank me today, living or dead." Then he turned around and ran. He didn't wait for the main line. He took 120 hand-picked veterans with him, men just like him, grey-haired, scarred, and bored of peace.
Grey-haired, scarred, and bored of peace. What was the name of that movie with Jeremy Renner? Was it Jeremy Renner? No, Renner. Actor's last name was Renner before he became before he started shooting arrows in the Avengers. What was his name? His name was Jeremy Renner, right? Comments, please. War is a drug. Hurt Locker. The Hurt Locker. He was so bored of his life. Guys, the film's been out for like more than 15 years, right? It's no longer my fault, right? He kept going back. He kept re-enlisting in the EOD, Explosive Ordnance Disposal, for the simple reason that he just can't live without the adrenaline rush of war or being shot at or defusing bombs. So I'm assuming we're looking at the same men here. who simply can't live without that adrenaline rush.
They crashed into Pompey's center line like a human battering ram. They weren't fighting for territory.
Oh my god. This could be after already when Caesar crossed the Rubicon and Pompey abandoned Rome with his legion because the only ones left to protect, if I got it correctly, if I remember that series correctly, Caesar crossed the Rubicon, but the problem is it was too late for Pompey and his senatorial allies to actually gather up an actual army, and the only ones left guarding Rome are basically green recruits or some of Caesar's veterans. So they abandoned the city and then they basically waited until they got an army of their own before they got an army of their own. So that's a timeline here.
They were fighting to break the enemy's will. This is the terrifying reality of the Evocati. The term itself, evocatus, comes from the Latin evocare, to summon, to call out.
Ooh.
It implies a personal relationship. These weren't men dragged from their farms by a levy. These were veterans who had survived 20 years of service, earned their missio honesta, and then, when the letter came from their old commander, they grabbed their swords and walked back into hell. But why? To understand the Evocati, you have to understand the addiction of the Roman legion. Imagine spending 2 decades in a world of absolute binary clarity. You march, you eat, you kill, you survive. You are a god of war in a crimson tunic. Then you retire. You're given a plot of land in the middle of nowhere. You're expected to grow cabbages. The silence is deafening. The neighbours are soft. You have nothing in common with them. You are an apex predator trapped in a petting zoo. So when Caesar called, they didn't just accept. They were relieved.
Oh.
At fast.
This is probably one of the reasons. They actually made a study about this with regards to the prohibition and the Al Capone era. Why so many? Why it was so bloody? Why the whole gang scene was so bloody in that particular time? Because the First World War just ended, and you have a ton of men coming home from the wars, and a lot of them were young men, right? So a lot of them were young men who enlisted at at 18, and a lot of them lied about their age. So imagine 18 and the First World War lasted for how many years? You did it instead of you were at home learning a trade or studying in school, you were at war. So when they got home, there were no jobs waiting for them. And all they had was the skills they learned from war. So imagine no one else was hiring except Al Capone and the gangs and the mobs. So why not do that? Do what they do best, or do what they were trained to do. Do what they were experienced. Do what they do best. They have experience in combat, so why not use that? No one else is paying, so join the gangs, join the mob, run those lines. Start bootlegging, get the real McCoy. So imagine you've got a ton of these men. I mean, there's not a lot of them actually reach the full 20-year tilt. Because if I'm not mistaken, Rome, you need to do 20-year service and then you retire and then that's it. Why go back? Apparently, a lot of them get bored because war is a drug. Huh. Interesting.
The Evocati were not used as cannon fodder.
No, they were not.
Caesar used them as tactical stabilizers. He sprinkled them among the terrified new recruits. When a 16-year-old boy saw Crustinus, a man with more scars than teeth, charging fearlessly, the boy stopped shaking. The Evocati were the skeletal structure of the army. They were the stiffeners. But their return came with a price. And Evocatus was not a normal soldier. He was a paradox. He held a rank that didn't officially exist on the pay charts of the Republic, but carried more weight than a tribune. He answered only to the general. He didn't dig ditches. He didn't stand night watch. He rode a horse on the march while others walked. He was paid double, sometimes triple the wage of a legionary.
So, like an NCO who's by this time, Because check this out, right? My first sergeant, he was a girl actually, and she has done it all. She's done UN peacekeeping missions. She trained with the British Commonwealth Forces. She's got her paratrooper badge, and a lot of the officers, actual commissioned officers, really actually respected her.
This created a dangerous dynamic. To the enemy, they were nightmares, men who knew every trick of slaughter.
Yep.
To the regular Roman soldier, they were idols to be envied. But to the Roman state, they were a cancer. Think about it. These men were not loyal to the flag. They were loyal to the paycheck and the man signing it. Crustinus didn't die for the Senate. He died for Caesar.
Ah.
The rise of the Evocati marked the moment Rome's armies stopped belonging to the people and started belonging to the warlords.
I mean, that's why you swear the oath of allegiance to the flag of the United States of America, not one man. Right?
When Caesar found Crustinus' body, he saw the sword wound through the face. It was a clean death.
Yes, it
frontal,
was.
aggressive. Caesar honoured him with a unique medal, a military decoration usually reserved for aristocrats, not grunts. It was an acknowledgement that without these summoned ones, Caesar would have been...
What was that? Ah. That was... Ah, that was so weird. Hold on. Just fix everything up. Ah. 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 There we go. Okay. Okay. That was so weird, by the way. I'm not sure if the mic picked it up, but my phone started playing a Facebook video or something because both of my phones are charging behind me right now, and it suddenly started playing. The video suddenly started playing. I left the app open, and that was that. But the video started playing. Anyways, let's keep on going.
Been just another rebel executed in the Forum. In this documentary, we're going to tear apart the legend of the Roman veteran. We aren't looking at the marble statues, we are looking at the blood and the mud. We will examine how the Evocati became the secret weapon of the civil wars. We will see how they evolved from battlefield heroes into the political thugs that eventually formed the core of the Praetorian Guard, the men who would eventually murder emperors as easily as they killed barbarians.
Well, that was the Praetorian Guard. So, okay, so history has painted them to be, well, not a good thing, the Evocati, because their loyalty lies within the men and to themselves. All right. So this is gonna be definitely interesting. All right, I'm glad we picked this video up.
Barbarians. We will analyze their equipment, their unique privileges, and the dark psychological toll of a life spent entirely at war. Crustinus was just the beginning.
Ooh.
He was the prototype. He showed the world that a soldier's loyalty could be bought, but his ferocity was priceless. The Evocati were the answer to a question Rome was afraid to ask. What happens when you create a class of men who are only good at one thing?
Yeah.
You get a...
Ergo, you get the Prohibition era gangsters. You have a ton of veterans coming home, coming into a recession, no work whatsoever, and they do one thing best. They are so good at one thing, and that is war.
Weapon that eventually turns on its master. The Battle of Pharsalus ended with Caesar as the master of the world, but it was built on the backs of men who couldn't handle peace. Imagine the scene. It is a quiet morning in the hills of Tuscany. A man is working his field. He is 45 years old, his body a map of old scars aching in the damp weather. He is a retired legionary, holding a bronze tablet known as a diploma, proof of his 20 years of service and his right to be left alone. Then, a rider appears on the horizon. The rider isn't a tax collector. He wears the
his right to be left alone, because why not?
Tunic of a staff officer. He carries a sealed scroll from a man the veteran hasn't seen in 3 years, a man named Caesar, or Pompey, or Octavian. The scroll is not an order, it is an invitation. This is the bureaucratic birth of an Evocatius. In the rigid hierarchy of Roman military ranks, there was a clear line between the soldier and the civilian. Once you crossed that line and retired, the state lost its claim on your body. You were free. To bring you back required a legal workaround. The term Evocati specifically refers to this mechanism. The general had to call out to the individual. It was a brilliant psychological play. For 20 years, these men had been just numbers in a cohort.
Yep.
Now, the most powerful man in the Republic was asking for them by name. It transformed the relation.
It transformed them. Yeah, it was about to say it transformed into a relationship, but no. You were being asked by name. You are no longer an NPC. You are now a main character. You are now one of my elite employees. Just imagine how flattering that effect is that, the president himself pointing at you directly and knowing your name. That is something else. That is one way to recruit a man that would actually inspire loyalty. Like that you're not just a rank and serial number to this man. You are an actual named character. You are a named hero. So this is why what was that? Reincarnated as a slime in another world, Rimuru. That's why he named his monsters, because it was so important to the story or to the plot of that particular person or that particular monster. Being a named character was everything. You are not just a name, a rank and a serial number. You had an actual name. You were referred to by name. So yeah, that would definitely inspire loyalty. You're now main character, no longer an NPC.
Relationship from master and servant into patron and client.
Patron and client.
When the veteran accepted the call.
That's something, patron and client. Okay, I definitely had a different interpretation on that recruitment style, but just imagine someone of his Caesar stature pointing out to you by name. But anyways, I didn't interpret it that way, but apparently the whole thing's transactional. That Caesar is now your client.
He didn't return as a common soldier or Gregorius. He entered a grey zone of military classification. He was technically a volunteer soldier, but with privileges that would make a regular centurion grind his teeth in envy. First, there was the money. An Evocatus could negotiate his own terms. Historical records suggest they were often paid anywhere from double to quadruple the standard legionary pay. But the real currency was status. They were granted the rank of immunes. This was a massive deal. In the Roman legion, life was 90% manual labour and 10% fighting. Soldiers dug latrines, built fortified camps every single night, and stood guard in the rain. And
that was the best part. You just, stood back and watched. You get to watch.
Artus did none of that. He was exempt from all menial duties. He didn't dig. He didn't patrol. He didn't carry the crushing 60-pound marching pack, the Sarsina, that earned regular soldiers the nickname Marius's mules. Instead, the Evocati often had permission to own a horse for travel, or at least a mule for his personal gear. While the fresh recruits were breaking their backs building a palisade wall, the Evocati were sitting by the fire, sharpening their swords and waiting for the battle. This created a visible caste system within the camp. The Evocati effectively operated outside the standard chain of command. They answered directly to the prefect or the general himself. In many ways, they were the ancient equivalent of technical advisors or warrant officers. They possessed the institution.
I guess more like warrant officers, because technical advisor would definitely mean you're above it all, or you're apart from the whole thing, because at least in a modern setting, technical advisors equals a private contractor. So at this point, gray area, gray zone, they would come in as warrant officers, but more like a well-respected warrant officers, because at the present time, as a warrant officer, it's considered as somewhat of a gray zone between enlisted NCOs and actual commissioned officers. Like, they can't seem to figure out what exactly are you. I mean, are you one of us? Are you one of them? Who knows? But they're basically, if I'm not mistaken, they're basically known or utilized for their expertise for one particular subject, either it be, from maintenance to piloting helicopters. So,
Institutional knowledge that the army desperately needed but couldn't teach in boot camp. But this special status served a darker purpose. By separating the Evocati from the regular labour pool, the generals were isolating them from the common soldiery.
Yep.
They were creating a class of men whose loyalty was exclusively vertical, up to the general, rather than horizontal to their fellow citizens. The equipment reflected this status. While a standard legionary was issued mass-produced state armour, and Evocatus often brought his own. They wore a mix of old, high-quality gear they had kept from their previous service, combined with new, custom-made pieces purchased with their signing bonus. Imagine a formation where everyone is wearing identical government-issue helmets, and then there is a group of 300 men wearing personalised, battle-tested armour, perhaps decorated with trophies from Gaul or Spain. It sent a visual message: we are not you. This visual distinction was crucial. It meant that on the battlefield, everyone knew where the Evocati were. They were the anchors.
Yep.
When a line started to waver, the sight of these distinctively armed veterans holding their ground acted as a psychological rally point.
Ooh.
However, the system of the Evocati revealed a fundamental flaw in the late Republic. The state was no longer capable of raising armies that could win without these mercenaries of loyalty. The reliance on Evocati was an admission that the traditional levy system was failing. The citizen soldier was being replaced by the career professional, so the veteran accepts the scroll. He packs his gear, he leaves his farm, perhaps kissing a wife and children goodbye, telling them he will return with enough gold to buy the neighbour's land.
Yeah.
He rides to the muster point. He is no longer a farmer.
The muster point, also known as the Field of Mars.
He is once again a predator. But as he rejoins the Legion, he finds that while his wallet is heavier and his burden is lighter, the cost is now internal. He has admitted to himself that he belongs to the war, not the peace. And as we will see, this addiction to the adrenaline of combat creates a specific kind of psychological damage.
War is a drug.
A mindset that makes them incredibly effective at killing, but terrifyingly unstable in a civil society.
In other words, Vietnam, it's like quite a stereotype with Vietnam veterans who just, can't make it in the world. So they just, keep re-enlisting. Because they simply can't figure out how to walk around in the real world anymore. And what? Term of service in Vietnam or tour was like, 6 months? Can someone please put it down in the comments? So imagine that, right? You spent like 6 months in country and then you come back, you just can't figure it out anymore. So imagine those children, those teenagers in the First World War. Right? They come back home and they know nothing but war. For the past 3 to 5 years. That's all they did. They were trained to do it. That's all they knew. And now they're back, and what? Do we go back to school? Do we go back to normal after that? In Peter Jackson's They Shall Not Grow Old, I remember the ending. Like, there was this no sigh of relief. Everyone just sort of, the way I could describe it, the way that Peter Jackson described the whole thing, or presented the whole thing, the way that I could describe it, how he presented the whole thing, it was sort of a mass layoff, right? The end of the war provided some sort of a mass layoff to the fighting men. Like, what do we do now? Go home. Okay. And they did. And there was nothing waiting for them. Like, there were no massive cheering that was for the streets, but for the soldiers in the front line and Peter Jackson's documentary. It looked more like that there was a massive layoff. Like, imagine those factory guys getting laid off because, the factory had to shut down. To me, it looked like that. So I'm guessing these men felt like, they lost their purpose, they lost their jobs.
Modern term we use to describe soldiers who return from combat only to find they cannot function in society. PTSD, or post-traumatic stress disorder. We tend to think of this as a modern phenomenon, born of high explosives and constant bombardment. But the human brain hasn't changed in 2,000 years. The Romans didn't have a clinical name for it, but they knew exactly what it looked like. They saw it in the 1,000-yard stare of the veteran sitting in the tavern. They heard it in the screaming nightmares of the farmer next door. For the Evocati, peace was not a reward, it was a prison. Consider the reality of the Roman retirement package. After 20 years of service, the Republic gave you a plot of land. It sounds idyllic. You're supposed to become a gentleman farmer, the backbone of the Roman economy. But let's look closer. You have spent 2 decades surrounded by 8 close comrades. Your contubernium, you ate with them, marched with them, and killed for them. You slept in a tent where the air was thick with the smell.
Holy crap, I wonder how he described it so that the AI would present it this way. Oh my god, AI is going to ruin everything. It's just like, before we started this morning, it's like, some of these content creators have been relying way too much on AI because there's one whose thumbnail was clear survival behor casual. In other words, he didn't even bother to check the thumbnail that if the AI correctly spelled the whole thing.
Of sweat and leather.
Anyways.
You were never alone. You were part of a massive living organism that had a clear purpose every single day. Then you're discharged. You're sent to a farm in a colony, perhaps in Gaul or North Africa. Suddenly it is quiet. The only sound is the wind in the wheat. You're expected to care about the price of grain or a fence dispute with a neighbour. Your wife is a stranger you barely know. Your children look at you with fear because you're a hard, violent man who barks orders instead of asking questions. This transition was often impossible. Many historians argue that the primary motivation for the Evocati was greed. It is true that the pay was lucrative, but money alone does not.
Because they simply couldn't hack it anymore. It couldn't have been greed. It couldn't have been about the money. Because that's why a lot of the right-wing groups right now are filled with veterans. Imagine you spent a lifetime, or after college, after high school, you spent a lifetime in the army or in the armed forces. And you followed orders, you did everything by the number and by the book, and some of them simply miss it. And yeah, the money's good, but the way this whole thing's being presented, I think most of them did it for the love of the game. Money's a bonus, but you get a fighting force like this because of men who love it. Because of men who do it for the love of the game, not just for the money. Because we've all seen pure mercenaries. This is not a new thing. Actually, this is the old thing. This is the age of antiquity. Greece, and then no. The age of antiquity is Greece. So we've got Rome, and then it falls down. You've got the Middle Ages, and then finally you have the Renaissance. In the Renaissance, you've got pure mercenaries who switch side all willy nilly, who simply did it for the money. And there have been recorded scenarios, or recorded. It's well recorded that there have been times where these mercenary bands would basically produce mock battles instead of actually fighting. Because they were there for greed, but these men did it for the love of the game. Definitely not for the money.
Not make a man walk back into a shield wall. Rich men don't volunteer for suicide missions.
No, they don't.
The driving force was something deeper, something we might call a military institutionalization. For an Evocatus, the Legion was the only place that made sense. In the camp, the rules were simple. Obey the order, hold the line, eat the ration. The chaos of battle was paradoxically the only place they felt calm. This is a phenomenon well documented in ancient PTSD studies. The addiction to the high-stakes environment. The brain becomes rewired for survival. In a civilian world where there is no threat, the veteran feels a constant itching anxiety. They are hyper-vigilant, scanning for enemies that aren't there. Returning to the Legion as an Evocatus fixed everything. It gave them back their identity. They weren't just the old man at the end of the lane anymore. They were veteran warriors. They were respected. When they walked through the camp, young soldiers parted the way. They reconnected with the only people who truly understood them, other veterans. This shared trauma created a brotherhood that was stronger than blood. When Caesar called them back, he wasn't just offering them a job, he was offering them a cure for their loneliness. He was saying, come back to the family. There is a chilling account from the civil wars of a group of Evocati who were captured by the enemy. They were offered a chance to switch sides and live. They refused. They chose execution over betrayal. This wasn't just loyalty.
See, mercenaries wouldn't do that, and it's well recorded during the Renaissance that mercenaries switch sides all willy-nilly. They, perform mock battles. But these men did it for the love of the game.
To a general, it was loyalty to their own identity. To switch sides would be to admit that their service meant nothing. They would rather die as Evocati than live as turncoats. This psychological dependency made them incredibly dangerous. A young soldier fights because he's afraid of punishment, or because he wants glory. An Evocatus fights because fighting is who he is. He has no illusions about glory. He knows exactly what a sword does to a human stomach.
There we go. Actual
He knows the sound.
In Che Guevara's guerrilla warfare, he instituted suicide battalions. Basically, in a guerrilla action or in a guerrilla strike, what he does is basically they will basically attack this camp, or they would basically attack this convoy, whatever, and that particular camp or convoy would call for reinforcements. And what the suicide battalion does is they would basically slam themselves into the oncoming reinforcements. And the way they were recruited and the way it was done is that these fighters would done is that they would establish camps. Him, Fidel Castro, and the whole cadre. They would establish camps and they would work these camps. And fighting is the reward. Right? You get to train, but you had to provide. Of course, the whole thing was entirely communist, but fighting in itself was the reward. Because fine, you get to contribute to the cause by farming, by providing for the logistics of the camp, by providing for the logistics of the revolution. But most of them really wanted to fight. They instituted fighting as a form of reward, and one of the best things that came out of it was the institutionalization of the suicide squads by Che Guevara. And his unit, it was considered to be an honor, wearing that tab or wearing that badge that you were part of the suicide battalion, whose job is to slam into the reinforcements in order so that the main action or that the main force would be able to achieve its objectives. Anyways, keep on going.
Sound a man makes when he is crushed by a horse. He has seen it 1,000 times, and he came back for more.
Yeah.
This detached brutality is what made them the perfect tool for civil war.
What was the name of that guy? Season 4 of Witcher? The one who kills witchers, and he was described as there's this video of him going viral killing the rats, or Yennefer. Was it Yennefer? No. Triss's friends, the rats or something. What was his name? Forgot. Someone please put it down in the comments. He was described as a man, human, who saw hell and decided he liked the place.
When you are fighting foreign barbarians, patriotism is easy.
Yeah.
But when you are asked to march on Rome or kill fellow citizens, a conscience is a liability.
There we go.
The Evocati had long since suppressed their civilian conscience. Their moral compass pointed only one way, toward the commander. Julius Caesar understood this better than anyone. He knew he was recruiting men who were broken by peace.
Caesar.
He leveraged their inability to adapt. He weaponized their trauma. By creating the Evocati Corps, he built a sanctuary for the damaged, violent men he had created, and in return, they gave him the empire. As we look at the tactical application of these men in the next section, remember this. They were not super soldiers in the comic book sense.
Nope.
They were men running away from the silence of their own homes, seeking the comforting noise of war. If you walk through a Roman marching camp in 48 BC, you would see a sea of uniformity. Thousands of men wearing identical tunics, carrying identical shields, and sweating under identical packs. But then you would see them. They sit apart from the main cohorts. They aren't digging the defensive ditch, a back-breaking task that every regular legionary, regardless of rank, is expected to perform every single evening. Instead, they are cleaning their weapons or playing dice.
Wait, how do I fix this? My face won't go back! What's going on? First, why am I afraid?
Eat the
Hold up. I need to check on something. What's going on? My God. There we go. Oh my God. There we go. Hold up.
Carrying identical shields and sweating under identical packs. But then you would see them. They sit apart from the main cohorts. They aren't digging the defensive ditch, a back-breaking task that every regular legionary, regardless of rank, is expected to perform every single evening. Instead, they are cleaning their weapons or playing dice. Their equipment is a chaotic, terrifying mix of the old and the expensive. This is the visual signature of the Evocati. They were
old and expensive. In other words, they don't need to conform anymore. They've earned their keep.
were the only men in the Roman war machine who were allowed to look like individuals. To understand their status, you must look at their feet. A regular soldier wore standard caligae, heavy hobnailed sandals issued by the quartermaster. An evocatus often wore custom boots, perhaps lined with fur for comfort, or made of higher quality leather. It seems like a small detail, but in an army that walked across the known world, footwear was a status symbol. Then look at their armour. By the mid-1st century BC, Roman military equipment was standardized.
I've always wondered if the whole sandal thing was practical. But anyways.
But an evocatus might still wear the chainmail shirt, or lorica hamata he was issued 20 years ago, now reinforced with custom plating, or he might wear a helmet captured from a Gallic chieftain, modified with Roman cheek guards. They didn't care about regulations. They cared about survival.
They didn't have to. Who's gonna tell them no?
Their gear was often covered in fallery, silver and gold medallions awarded for bravery in previous campaigns. To a fresh recruit, looking at an Evocates was like looking at a living trophy case. But the greatest privilege wasn't the armour, it was the exemption. The Latin term is immunes. It means exactly what it sounds like. They were immune to the drudgery of service. The Roman legion was essentially a construction crew that sometimes fought battles. The sarcina, the marching pack, weighed up to 60 pounds. It contained tools, rations, a cooking pot, and 2 stakes for the palisade. The Evocati didn't carry this. They had servants, known as colognes, or they had mules. While the rank and file were breaking their backs hauling timber, the Evocati were resting their legs for the fight.
So they were like what? Medieval knights with an entire retinue behind them following them around in battle? That is something, and I'm guessing with their rates they could actually pay for it. Because that's one of the main distinctions between the professional army and during the medieval times. You've got levies, is that everyone was supposed to pay their own. Being a knight means you had to pay your own way. It's part of your obligation to get called upon. You get your own, you get like a plot of land. You get to tax that, and then you get to kick up the vig to the baron or to the noble above you, and so on and so forth until it reaches the king. So since they're getting paid regularly, yeah, I guess life is good for them, at least, because it's quite well. It's been a recorded fact during the medieval era that there were a lot of families that went down, or whose wealth went down because they had to support their knights, or they had to support their family members during wartime. Some of them had to pay ransom if he was captured, or if he was just sending him out to war was expensive. You had to pay for servants, you had to pay for the squires, you had to pay for his upkeep, his horse feed, everything.
This created a palpable tension in the ranks. You can imagine the resentment of a young legionary, muddy and exhausted, watching these grey-haired veterans eating better food and sleeping in larger tents. But that resentment usually evaporated the moment the battle started. Because when the line formed, the Evocati justified every ounce of their privilege. Their equipment was optimized for killing, not marching. Their swords were often honed to a razor edge that standard issue blades couldn't match. They carried extra javelins. They fought with a loose, confident spacing that only experts dare to use. We also see a fascinating detail in the historical record regarding their personal lives. Technically, Roman soldiers were forbidden to marry. It was a rule strictly enforced to ensure loyalty to the state. But for the Evocati, commanders turned a blind eye. Many of them brought their unofficial wives and children along in the baggage train. They were
field wives. So they had field wives, alright?
A travelling warrior caste, a mobile village within the army. This special treatment served a tactical purpose. By allowing them these comforts, commanders like Caesar ensured that the Evocati remained physically fresh and mentally sharp. They were being preserved for the critical moment. They were the ace in the hole. However, this reliance on an elite, privileged class of veteran had a destabilizing effect on Roman legion tactics. It eroded the egalitarian spirit of the manipular system, where every citizen soldier was theoretically equal. It introduced the concept of the super soldier to the Roman psyche. So picture them now.
No, special forces warrior elite. I read somewhere that they had to rely, or at a certain point, as warfare evolved, and one of the evolutions, or one of the things about the evolution of warfare is the development of special forces. Each and every from each level of civilization, wherever they may be, or whatever standard of civilization, they almost always had some form of special forces. You've got the band of during antiquity. You have the band of thieves. You have the immortals. So on and so forth. And here you have the Evocati.
A group of 300 men, heavily scarred, wearing a mismatch of high-end armour, riding horses while others walk, looking down at the regular troops with a mix of pity and contempt. They are rested, they are well fed, and they are waiting for the general to give the signal. Because when the signal comes, they are going to do things that the regular army cannot. We often view the Evocati through the lens of video games or movies, elite units you unlock to deal massive damage. But Julius Caesar's army was not a video game. It was a volatile political entity, a city on the move filled with rumours, fear, and potential mutiny. Modern historians are beginning to view the Evocati as something far more sophisticated than just heavy infantry.
Yes,
they were a human intelligence network. Think about the logistical nightmare of the Civil War. Caesar was marching Roman citizens to fight other Roman citizens. The risk of defection was sky high. If a charismatic officer on the other side offered better pay, whole cohorts could switch sides overnight.
Yes, why not?
Caesar needed a way to control the narrative within his own camp. He couldn't be at every campfire, but the Evocati could. This is the Evocati network theory. Because these veterans were dispersed throughout the legions, sometimes grouped together, but often embedded
That's not intelligence, that's propaganda.
Near raw recruits. They acted as political officers. Imagine a cold night in Gaul or Spain. Soldiers are huddled around a fire, grumbling about the lack of bread or the delay in pay.
Food.
A young soldier starts talking about how Pompey's camp has better wine. In a normal army, that mutinous talk spreads like a virus. In Caesar's army, an Evocatus is sitting right there. He doesn't need to report the soldier to the centurion. He just leans in, shows his scars, and tells a story about how Caesar personally saved his life 5 years ago, or how Pompey abandons his men. He shuts down the dissent not with discipline, but with influence. They were the original influencers, weaponized to maintain morale. This psychological role was crucial to Roman civil war tactics. The Evocati inoculated the army against fear. In battle, panic is contagious. It starts with one man dropping his shield and running. When that happens, the formation collapses. Caesar used the Evocati like iron rebar in concrete. By placing these unflappable veterans at critical friction points in the line, he ensured that when the panic started, it hit a wall of absolute calm. We see this dynamic clearly in the way Caesar structured his lines. He didn't always mass the Evocati into a single hammer. Sometimes he used them as a reserve force that operated independently of the standard trumpet signals. This gave him a massive asymmetric advantage. While Pompey's officers were frantically trying to relay orders through a chaotic chain of command, Caesar's Evocati could see a gap opening up and plug it on their own initiative. They didn't need to be told what to do.
So, independent, imagine that. You've got maniples running around, you've got formations running around, and then you've got an independent group who's actually loyal to you. That would, by their own initiative, based on their own assessment, would do whatever they need to do in order to win this particular battle. That was genius. Actually, roughly the same thing during what I forgot the name of that particular battle, but in Kuwait, one of the America's, that was quote unquote last America's armored battle. The distinction between Iraqi tank or Iraqi officers or Iraqi soldiers in that particular tank battle, was that they couldn't they had no independence, in the sense that they couldn't make independent decisions, whereas American soldiers or American tankers and officers had that leeway to actually make independent decisions as circumstances changed during the battle. Here you have an actual unit running around that that could make their own assessment, and that would had the freedom to do what they needed to do in order to actually win the battle for you. You didn't even have to supervise them. They were loyal to you. This was a suicide squad that was completely loyal to you. No need for that grenade at the back of the neck or something.
They knew the flow of battle better than the officers did. This autonomy was terrifying to the enemy.
Yes, it was.
Fighting a regular legion was predictable. They moved in blocks. Fighting a legion laced with Evocati was like fighting a hydra. You could break the main line, but then you would run into pockets of resistance that simply refused to die or retreat. Furthermore, this network allowed Caesar to execute complex maneuvers that were usually impossible for ancient armies. Night marches, rapid entrenchment, surprise amphibious landings, these required high discipline. The Evocati acted as force multipliers, guiding the green troops through the complex logistics,
so quote-unquote like armor.
Ensuring the pace was kept.
I like this video.
But this network had a dark side. It meant that Caesar's army was essentially a cult of personality. The Evocati were not loyal to the rank of general. They were loyal to the man Julius. They created a barrier between the common soldier and the Republic. If the Senate issued an order that contradicted Caesar, the Evocati were the ones who would laugh it off and tell the men to ignore it. They were the enforcers of Caesar's will, ensuring that the machine never questioned the operator. So, when we look at the battle maps of the Civil War, don't just look for the flanking maneuvers, look for the invisible web holding the red blocks together. That web was spun by the Evocati. They ensured that when the order came to kill their fellow Romans, the army didn't hesitate. But all the psychological warfare in the world doesn't matter if you can't win the fight. Influence is useful in the camp, but on the battlefield, physics takes over. And the physics of ancient warfare were brutal.
Yes, it was.
We're going to fast forward to the Battle of Thapsus in 46 BC in modern-day Tunisia. The enemy here wasn't just other Romans, it was King Juba and his 60 war elephants. For a standard legionary, an armoured elephant charging at 20 miles per hour is the end of the world.
Probably
it is
was.
a psychological weapon designed to break human instinct. But for the Evocati, it was a logic puzzle. They had seen elephants before. They knew the beast panic easily. Historical accounts suggest that while fresh recruits froze in terror, the veterans, these ancient special forces, executed a maneuver that seems almost suicidal. They didn't retreat, they advanced. They used axes and slings, targeting the eyes and the sensitive trunks of the beasts. They turned the enemy's greatest weapon against them.
Oh, I felt sorry. I mean, you just had to feel sorry for the elephant. Like, they didn't even know why they were there. They were just, doing a job.
Sending the elephants stampeding back into their own lines. This wasn't bravery, it was muscle memory. They knew exactly where to hit to cause maximum pain with minimum effort. But the true test of the Evocati came a year later, at the Battle of Munda in southern Spain. This is the battle that history often glosses over, but it was the most desperate moment of Caesar's life. Munda was a meat grinder. Pompey's sons had gathered a massive army, and they held the high ground.
So basically, if I'm not mistaken, if I remember correctly, Caesar takes over Rome, leaves Mark Antony, or I can't remember if he's already called in the legions after this one, but basically he was chasing Pompey, and then Pompey managed to gather an army, and then it was Caesar's turn to run. And at a certain point, they just had to face each other.
Fighting was close quarters, shield to shield for hours. There was no manoeuvring, no brilliant tactics, just pushing and stabbing in the mud.
The
Roman line began to buckle. The sheer weight of the enemy was crushing Caesar's front ranks. The recruits were breaking. They were exhausted, terrified, and ready to rout. If the line broke, Caesar was dead. The war was lost. In that moment of absolute crisis, the distinction between the general and the Evocati vanished. Caesar did something unthinkable for a commander-in-chief. He took off his helmet so his face could be seen. He grabbed a shield from a terrified soldier and ran to the front line. Historians say he came within 10 feet of the enemy spears. He shouted at his men, "Are you going to let your general be delivered to boys?" This was the trigger. The regular soldiers were shamed, but the Evocati were activated. Seeing their old man in the kill zone, the veterans surged forward with a horrific second wind. The 10th Legion, Caesar's favourites, heavily populated by Evocati, engaged in what can only be described as a frenzy. They didn't just push the enemy back, they butchered them. They began to target the enemy officers specifically. They used the Spanish sword thrust, aiming for the face and groin, bypassing the shield. The discipline of the enemy collapsed under this hyper-aggressive assault. The Evocati turned a stalemate into a slaughter. By the end of the day, 30,000 enemy soldiers lay dead. Munda proved that the Evocati were not just elite units. They were the ultimate insurance policy. They were the only ones capable of operating at peak efficiency when the plan went to hell. However, the violence at Munda changed something. The Evocati had saved Caesar, but they had also realised their own power. They looked around at the carnage, dead Romans piled high on Spanish soil, and realised
no one was there to stop him?
That the Republic was gone. There was no Senate, no law, no constitution that mattered. There was only the sword, and they held the handle. This realisation is crucial. When you turn soldiers into kings of the battlefield, it is very hard to turn them back into servants of the state. The ferocity they showed at Munda was about to be brought home to Rome itself. They had won the war for Caesar. Now they expected their reward. On the Ides of March 44 BC, Julius Caesar was stabbed 23 times. He died on the Senate floor surrounded by politicians. Where were his lethal Evocati? Where was the network? They were outside the city, or disbanded, because Roman law forbade generals from bringing armed soldiers into the sacred boundary of Rome. Caesar made a fatal mistake. He trusted the law. His successor, a cold,
That's a bad thing. He trusted the law. And you've got precedents.
calculating teenager named Octavian, who would become Augustus Caesar, looked at his uncle's body and learned the most important lesson of his life. Laws do not stop knives. Only swords stop knives. And so, the Evocati evolved. Under Augustus, the concept of the re-enlisted veteran was stripped of its temporary emergency nature and poured into the concrete foundation of the empire. He didn't just want veterans for a campaign, he wanted them for a permanent regime. He formalized them into the Evocati Augusti. This was a stroke of genius. Augustus realized he needed a force that was completely detached from the regular legions and the Roman people. He needed men who owed their entire existence to him. He took the best of the Evocati, the most loyal, the most brutal, the most institutionalized, and used them to form the skeleton of the Praetorian Guard. We tend to think of the Praetorians as just elite bodyguards, but thanks to the inclusion of the Evocati, they were more like an officer candidate school mixed with the secret police. If you were an Evocatus in the time of Augustus, you were no longer sleeping in a muddy tent. You were likely stationed in Rome or its outskirts. You carried a distinct symbol of authority, a vinewood staff or vites. This wasn't a walking stick, it was a tool for beating discipline into subordinates. The Evocati Augusti became the drill instructors, the surveyors, and the administrators of the empire. They became the reservoir for the centurionate. If a legion on the Rhine needed a new primus pilus, Augustus didn't promote a local soldier who might be loyal to his local general. He sent an Evocatus from Rome. This man would arrive at the frontier, a stranger to the troops, loyal only to the emperor, ready to enforce the imperial will. They were the political commissars of the ancient world. But inside Rome, their role was darker. They were the grey wolves among the sheep. Augustus used the urban cohorts and the Praetorians to keep the peace. But keeping the peace in ancient Rome often meant disappearing people. Imagine walking through the Subura, the slums of Rome. You hear a rumour that a certain senator is planning a coup. The next night, a squad of men knocks on that senator's door. They aren't wearing the standard legionary red. They're wearing...
So, yeah, the Stasi, the KGB making people disappear isn't just a modern thing. Good to see that it's been done since Rome. So, yeah.
Wearing the finer white tunics of the Praetorians, perhaps with togas draped over their armour to blend in. The men leading them are Evocati. They don't panic. They don't hesitate. They have stormed cities and fought elephants. Arresting a soft politician is nothing to them. This shifted the power dynamic of the world. For 500 years, Rome was ruled by the Senate. Now it was ruled by whoever held the leash of the Evocati and the Guard. The veterans had traded their freedom for power. They were no longer the summoned ones of a charismatic general. They were the cog in a totalitarian machine. It is here that we see the tragedy of the Evocati deepen. In the days of Crastinus and Caesar, there was a raw, rugged honour to their service. They fought in the open. Now they were becoming the instruments of oppression.
They're becoming a secret police.
Were the ones who ensured that the emperor could sleep at night, while everyone else lived in fear. But a weapon forged in blood eventually demands blood. As the Evocati became more entrenched in the politics of Rome, they began to realize that they didn't just have to serve the emperor, they could choose him. Or, if the pay wasn't good enough, they could change him. War is ugly, but mutiny is hideous. In AD 14, the Emperor Augustus died. For the first time in nearly half a century, the Roman world held its breath. The Pax Romana was fragile. On the Rhine frontier, the legions stationed there saw an opportunity. They were tired. They were broke. They had been serving for 30 years in some cases, with no discharge in sight. They looked at their scars, then they looked at their commanders, and they snapped. This is the famous Mutiny of the Rhine, vividly documented in the Tacitus annals. The legions descended into anarchy. They killed their centurions. They threw their officers into the river. It was a workers' strike, armed with gladii. But amidst this chaos, one group stood apart.
A strike, not a coup? Interesting. Because I would have considered the whole thing to be a coup.
The Evocati.
Oh wait, my mistake, because a who means that you try to depose the current ruling regime, but apparently this one's just plain mutiny or just plain a worker strike. This is just plain mutiny. They want none of this bullshit anymore. Anyways.
To the mutinous soldiers, the Evocati were no longer brothers. They were class traitors. Remember, the Evocati were immunes. They didn't dig the ditches. They got the double pay. They represented everything the regular grunts were angry about. The mutineers saw them as the pets of the regime. The Roman commander Germanicus was in a desperate situation. He had lost control of the army. He needed a hammer to break the rebellion, but he couldn't use the regular troops because they were the rebellion. So he turned to the only men he could trust, the veterans who had too much to lose if the system collapsed.
Yeah.
What happened next is one of the most chilling episodes in Roman military history. Germanicus didn't just order an execution, he orchestrated a purge.
Wait, Spartacus, right? In order to actually, Roman legions were losing to Spartacus, so they instituted the decimation. Every 10th man was killed. So, in this particular situation, the Evocati turned against their own brothers. Okay, got it.
According to Tacitus, a plan was hatched in secret. The loyal officers and the Evocati were given a list of names, the ringleaders of the mutiny. They waited until nightfall. The camp was asleep. The Evocati, armed and sober, moved into the tents of the men they had marched with just days before. They didn't wake them up to arrest them.
Nope.
They drew their swords and began to butcher them in their sleep. Tacitus describes the scene with horrifying clarity. Neither the slaughter nor the cause of the slaughter was known to the rest. There was only the sound of blows, wounds, and blood. It was a massacre of Romans by Romans inside their own camp, sanctioned by the general. The Evocati were the executioners. They dragged the bodies out of the tents and piled them up as a warning. This moment fundamentally changed the nature of the Evocati. They were no longer just elite soldiers. They were the internal affairs division of the legion, willing to do the dirty work that no one else would touch. They had proven that their loyalty to the hierarchy superseded their loyalty to the Brotherhood of Soldiers. This action solidified their reputation as the enforcers of dirt. If a governor needed a village burned to send a message, he sent the Evocati. If a political rival needed to have an accident on the road to Ostia...
So, they're now entirely a political tool. They're goons now. They're no longer soldiers. They're no longer patriots. Yeah. Okay, got it.
He hired a retired Evocatus. They became the fixers of the empire, but there is a psychological cost to becoming the villain in your own story. The separation between the Evocati and the regular troops grew into a chasm. They were feared, yes, but they were also isolated. They became a distinct caste, living in a bubble of privilege and violence. And as history shows, when an elite military unit becomes too isolated, too privileged, and too powerful, they stop serving the empire and start serving themselves. The Evocati had crushed the Roman mutiny.
I mean, it's well recorded that Rome's elite guards installed emperors, and there are countries right now, Thailand specifically, is under a military junta. And generals rule Thailand. The ruling family is relegated to ceremonial stuff because it's the actual army, it's the generals, it's the soldiers that actually rule the country.
But in doing so, they had tasted a new kind of power. The power of being the only ones in the room with weapons who were willing to use them. Nothing kills an elite unit faster than a worthless paycheck. For 3 centuries, the Evocati were the gold standard of Roman infantry. They relied on a stable system. The state had money, the currency had value, and the Roman identity meant something specific. But as the empire entered the chaos of the 3rd century, the pillars that supported the Evocati began to rot. This was the era of the fall of Rome in slow motion. Emperors were being assassinated every other year. Civil wars were constant, but the real killer was inflation. The silver denarius, once the envy of the ancient world, was being debased. Emperors mixed copper into the silver to print more money to pay the troops. Imagine being a veteran Evocatus. You're asked to return to service. You're promised a high wage. But when you receive your coin, it buys half of what it bought 10 years ago. The economic incentive, the greed that drove men like Christinus, evaporated. Why risk...
Earlier, we talked about them that, they did this whole thing for the love of the game, that, they weren't mercenaries. But, despite the fact that, I guess they evolved into something debased, like, a political tool, um, they're now goons. They're no longer patriots. So, I'm guessing, with the, loss and that kind of status, there's also a loss in their level of values. So yeah, they're not going to do it for the love of the game anymore. They're now doing it for the money, because these are a different type of men now.
Your life for a handful of debased metal that can't even buy a farm. Simultaneously, the very DNA of the Roman army was changing. This was the era of Roman military reforms, but reform is a polite word for desperation. The old legions, composed of Italian peasant citizens who spoke Latin and shared a common culture, were dying out.
It's now filled with auxiliaries and foreigners.
To fill the ranks, Rome turned to the Federati, barbarian mercenaries. These new soldiers were Goths, Franks and Alemanni.
There we go.
They were fierce warriors, arguably physically stronger than the Romans, but they didn't care about the traditions of the legion. They didn't respect the subtle authority of an Evocatus holding a vine staff. They followed their own tribal warlords. The Evocati network, that web of influence we talked about, was severed. An old Roman veteran could not influence a unit of Germanic mercenaries who barely spoke his language.
Nope, they definitely
The cultural
can.
bridge collapsed. The Evocati went from being the respected uncles of the army to being dinosaurs.
Aww.
Furthermore, the tactics changed. The rigid, discipline-heavy formations of Caesar's time gave way to more mobile, cavalry-heavy warfare to chase down raiders. The heavy infantry Evocatus, the master of the shield wall, was becoming obsolete.
I mean, the fall, quote-unquote, the division of Rome gave way to the cataphracts.
The battlefield belonged to the horsemen now. By the 4th century, the term Evocatus still existed, but it had been hollowed out. It became a purely administrative title. They were no longer the shock troops of Pharsalus. They were clerks, accountants, and mid-level bureaucrats working in the offices of the Magister Militum. They pushed styluses, not swords. The terrifying grey wolves who had butchered mutineers in their sleep were gone. In their place were tired old men trying to keep the paperwork of a dying empire in order. This decline mirrors the empire itself. Rome didn't explode, it dissolved. The specialized institutions like the Evocati required a high-functioning...
I mean, there's a saying, Rome wasn't built in a day, but it definitely fell in one. So... yeah, I'm not really sure what that saying was about, but here we go. That was it. This is the decline of the empire, and the empire was built upon the backs of these type of men, and these type of men were gone because they were turned into a political tool after the death of Caesar. Because of Gaius Octavius Caesar, Caesar's supposed heir, but anyways, adopted heir. So he turned them into a political tool, and that began the decline of the Evocati. Anyways, well, nothing lasts forever, I guess.
State to maintain. When the state stopped functioning, the specialists were the first to go. The army became a blunt instrument again, relying on mass and muscle rather than the surgical precision of the veterans.
There we go.
It is a somber end to their story. There was no last stand of the Evocati. They didn't die defending the gates of Rome against the Huns. They simply faded away.
That's actually a popular saying. Old soldiers don't die, they simply fade away. Like, here, basic test. What happened to Patton after the war? Can anyone tell me? What? Feel free to put it in the comments, but for the World War II buffs out there, what happened to Patton? What happened to Eisenhower? What happened to Montgomery after the war? What happened to them? Old soldiers, they don't die. They simply fade away.
They stopped answering the call because the voice calling them had become weak and the promises empty. But their legacy didn't disappear completely.
Nope.
The idea of the elite professional soldier, the man who fights not for a cause, but for his profession, is a concept that Rome gifted to the future. And as we move to our final section, we have to ask, do the Evocati still exist today? Not in tunics and sandals, but in spirit? History does not repeat itself, but human nature does. When we look back at the Evocati, it is tempting to see them as a curiosity of the ancient world. Men in sandals fighting with swords. But strip away the armour, and you see a phenomenon that is terrifyingly modern. Today, we don't call them Evocati. We call them private military contractors, or PMCs.
There we go.
We call them advisors, or specialists. Look at the headlines. Whether it is the Wagner Group operating in the shadows of global conflicts, or former special forces operators hired by private firms to protect VIPs in war zones, the dynamic is identical. Just like the Evocati, these are men who have graduated from the state military machine. They have the skills, the scars, and the discipline. And just like their Roman ancestors, they find that the civilian world has no use for their specific set of talents. A man who knows how to coordinate an ambush or clear a room is overqualified for a desk job and dangerous in a quiet neighborhood. So, the system calls them back.
Oh, you can use them in the neighborhood watch. Everyone's gonna respect the neighborhood watch.
The state, whether it is the Roman Republic or a modern superpower, realizes it has dirty work that needs doing.
Yep.
Work that the regular, conscripted, or public army cannot do without causing a scandal. They need deniable assets. They need efficiency. They need men who don't ask why, but only how much. The Evocati were the first...
No, I wouldn't consider them because the Evocati did it for the love of the game, and these men, You know what? Yeah, I guess he's right. Both groups do it for the love of the game.
Realization that war could...
money's good too, though.
...be privatized. They were the first admission that loyalty is a commodity. But the deepest tragedy isn't political, it's personal. Think back to Gaius Crastinus, the man we met at the beginning of this journey. The man who promised Caesar he would win, alive or dead. We often glorify that kind of warrior spirit. We call it heroism. But is it? Or is it a pathology? Crastinus represents the soldier who cannot come home. The tragedy of the Evocati is that they were men who were offered a second chance at life, a farm, a family, peace, and they rejected it. They chose the comfort of the shield wall over the uncertainty of freedom. They were institutionalized to the point where they loved the cage. As we close this file, ask yourself, how many Crastinus figures are walking among us today? Men and women who have served their time, who have done their duty, but who are secretly waiting for the phone to ring, waiting to be summoned back to the only place where they feel they belong. Rome fell. The legions vanished.
Because what else is there after a lifetime of service? What else are you going to do?
But the Evocati never really left. They just changed their uniforms. Thank you for joining me on this deep dive into the Roman Empire's most lethal secret unit. If this story of loyalty, violence, and human tragedy resonated with you, please subscribe and turn on notifications. I want to hear your thoughts in the comments. Do you think the Evocati were heroes of the Republic, or the villains who helped destroy it? And are PMCs today the same thing?
Probably.
Let's keep the discussion going. Until next time, remember, the past isn't dead. It's just waiting to be re-enlisted.